Hi, I'm Charlie Harp, and this is the Informonster Podcast. Today on the Informonster Podcast, I have Rachel Dunscombe from HL7 here to talk to us about her trajectory through healthcare and what she sees as the future of HL7. Welcome, Rachel.
Thank you so much for having me on, Charlie.
Well, one of the things we do on the Informonster Podcast when I have somebody on is I ask them to kind of give a little of their origin story for the listeners who may not be familiar with them. You mind doing that?
Yeah, absolutely. I've had a lot of hats in the past. I've been a CIO, I've been a CEO in healthcare, I've led academic programs and been a professor, and I've led not for profit standards bodies. So I've been around sort of the global scene of standards for a number of years, but actually leading global standards bodies for about 3 years. And I'm absolutely delighted to be here at HL7 International.
So let's click into that a little bit.
Yeah.
You know what? I hate when people say let's double click on that. People say it. I don't know how I got it let into my brain. But let me change that and just say, can you go a little bit more into your history? Talk about kind of the places you've been and the stuff that you've seen.
So I'll tell you my personal story. I was CIO at what was the most digitally mature organization in the NHS. And I was working on something called Data Saves Lives. And Data Saves Lives was using HL7 standards and other standards to pull together data to improve lives and save lives and actually quantify that. And there was one hugely impactful day when I came in and we were doing work on stroke. And we'd created sort of real-time data that was between care settings, and that was saving one life in 10 over 100 days and improving outcomes for everybody else. And it was at that point I kind of realized the answer is in the interoperability in the data. Yeah. We were also, when I was working in healthcare systems, I was one of the first integrated care systems, or ACOs as you'd know them. And we were putting together, quite novel ways back in sort of 2017 of running home-based pathways with devices and apps and wearables. And I could just see that unless we got the standards in place and unless we got the data, presented right place, right time, we could either miss this opportunity or we could really leverage it for new models of care. And I just became endlessly interested in all of the aspects of the interoperability. It just really captured me. It's like when you stand in a different perspective and suddenly see the world differently. I could see what this could offer for the next generation of healthcare that needs to be more cost effective, safer, more convenient for the citizen, right? Yeah. So that was kind of my epiphany moment. That also, I did do policy roles and academic roles publishing on this. All of these sort of, alongside my NHS role. But I think that day, probably when I went in and looked at the stroke data, was the day that I shifted.
It's kind of exciting. When I started out in healthcare a long time ago, and and I also kind of started in the trenches in the
Yeah.
clinical lab setting. And I think when you start in the trenches, you have a certain appreciation for the impact that you can have on people. It's like, well, I'm not a doctor. I can't save somebody's life in a operating theater. But the work that I do and the work that we do
Mm-hmm.
in informatics has a really significant impact on a lot of people. We can help a lot of people through what we do. And of course, the ability to exchange information and enrich what's happening or enrich the knowledge of the provider and the other folks around the patient is a huge benefit that standards bring that people, don't always get, like some of us that kind of started in the trenches, and you see kind of the Wild West,
Yeah.
and you see how the standards and some of the things we're doing can kind of bring order to that chaos and make it usable data. I think that's powerful. And I think that's why we get very passionate and kind of addicted to
Absolutely.
what else can we do?
Yeah.
We can do this. What else can we do?
Yeah. How can we make this better? Yeah. You kind of have to have that ability to picture where we could go in your mind. And that took me time to build. And it took all of that experience in health systems to inform that. But when you can actually see what we can do with interoperability terminology, and how we can bridge a lot of the gaps. I love the work of Peter Pronovost in the US, 1.3 trillion of defects in value, many of which we can address by getting the right data and the right terminology in the right place at the right time.
Yeah. And it's one of those things where we work with a number of organizations, and I deal with a lot of interoperability and data quality deniers. And what's interesting is, well, because it's hard for people in the trenches sometimes to understand why I have to do this extra work and what's the benefit of that. But what I've found is when people start to see the benefit of that, they do kind of get into that. Okay, what else can we
Yeah,
do? What's next?
absolutely.
So,
Absolutely.
in all the different hats, tell me about the CEO hat.
The CEO hat at HL7, yeah.
Oh, okay, so that's where you are today.
That's where I am today. So I've been CEO of the NHS Digital Academy. I used to lead all the digital health education for the NHS. I've
Okay.
been CEO at Open Air International, but HL7 was the biggest infrastructure sort of benefit that I had from interoperability as a CIO, and just, when the opportunity came to actually lead HL7, having seen how much benefit it had given me, I just wanted to go for that. So it's been a huge opportunity, and it's a global community as well. It's based, obviously, from the US, but I think it's beautiful to see a global standard emerging. Things like the International Patient Summary and all the other initiatives we're working on will allow people to travel and data to be collated around the globe for research. So for me, both that kind of, scale, but also the size of the opportunity. And I think, it's probably worth us touching on some of the size and scale of the opportunity. So if we look at the economics of this, the OECD is doing some really fantastic work, and they have been quantifying financially the benefits of interoperability. They're going to be publishing that later this year. Um, and that really is looking at somewhere in the region of 5% for every healthcare system, the actual financial benefit of interoperability as a minimum. And that's before you start putting AI on top.
Absolutely. So when you think about kind of your trajectory getting into this role with HL7, I mean, it's a little bit different. How do you see your background impacting the future of HL7 and where HL7 could go?
So I think for me, there are two things that HL7 need to enable. There is one piece which is around the new models of care, um, and the new ways of delivering care. And if we look at, things like the Caliper Accelerator, which we've just started up, we're embracing all of the new types of data, really putting HL7 as a foundation, the new infrastructure for healthcare, if you like, is one thing. The second thing is to safely embrace the AI agenda. So to provide the right data for AI to use and to be trained upon, as well as participating in the future in, the wider standards around AI. So I think they are the two big things that are coming up in the next 3-5 years for HL7. I have had a few people say to me, what standard is next? I don't think it's a question of what standard is next. I think it's a question of what we enable with the great standards that we have, and how we collaborate as well with other standards bodies. So for me, it's really going from what I would say has been a legislative push to do this to being a pull, because people can see the benefits and are really delivering the benefits at scale with it.
Oh, I think you're right. I think when you think about the what's happening in the U.S.
Yeah,
right now and all the impetus around implementing fire and making fire more performant, making it more usable. I think even the stuff that's coming out on HTI5, where it's
yes.
really, they're almost like they're saying, we don't care so much about your EMR and how it works. What we care about is how you're able to share data with fire. So
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, HTI5's been fascinating to read through and comment on. And for me, it's really about describing the outcome as opposed to how you do it, which I think is probably the way forward.
now, one of the things you said a minute ago is you said that, HL7 and AI, but everybody knows that AI is going to make terminologies in HL7 obsolete.
Oh, no, it's not. So, for my sins, I used to be the lead AI advisor on the AI Council for the UK government in healthcare. So, I have a lot of friends in this space, and I'm also part of a kind of action learning set ongoing in AI. That is not true at all. And none of the professionals I know that work in AI believe that that is going to happen. You need fixed points and you need variables. So the fixed points, AI needs to learn how our health systems work, what interoperability, what terminology it uses, and what language it speaks. Now, it may help us to improve our interoperability or terminology in the future by suggesting things, but it is not going to invent its own system that is going to work, you know, better on our system as it is today. And certainly for me, this idea that it doesn't need to have any fixed points to learn, it is a complete and utter fallacy.
Yeah, I agree. In fact, I did a previous podcast where I interviewed ChatGPT, and even it agreed that
Did
AI.
it? That's good. I'm glad it agrees. I'll chat with Gemini later, right?
No, I think that the terminologies, the ontologies, and the
Yes,
standards we have, it creates a scaffolding
it
that
does.
that puts some kind of certainty around the information, as opposed to, the word salad and the unstructured data that flies all around healthcare. So
And another thing for me, a lot of people said, well, AI will just go freeform and take everybody's voice input. But unless it knows the minimum safe data sets and other things, there's lots of reasons why we need that fixed point. And that's true of any AI. It needs that. The variables are then, things that it will process against that, like voice input. But we're not going to get to a position where it's going to start defining the standards for us, so or reinvent the standards.
yeah, I see AI in healthcare as it's a tool, just like anything else. It's
Yeah,
an accelerator because it can process through a lot of data. But I see that I think our interaction with AI in healthcare is an iterative thing, where we produce data, we present it to AI. AI helps us understand and sift through what's going on with the data, and then we instantiate that into fixed data for the next round,
yeah,
and that is would be a continuous cycle. I
yeah.
think I kind of feel like in the future, the way we represent structured data might change. We might
Mm.
do something that's more high resolution, but I do think that we're always going to need some definitive representation of what's going on in the patient.
Absolutely. Yeah. The best use cases that I have seen and experienced, and I've just been using a chatbot from an Austin, Texas based entity, healthcare entity, is the personalization and the experience around the knowledge, right? There's so much that, where our standards and our knowledge bases can be complemented by, say, generative AI, to create the right user experience for, our customers and our consumers. But at the end of the day, I don't think that we're going to be out of a job anytime soon.
One of the things that you've said before is that standards are part of healthcare's unseen structure. Can you
Yeah,
elaborate on that?
I'd actually say it's infrastructure as opposed to infrastructure, right? So yeah, I went down a bit of a rabbit hole while doing some kind of uh, analysis of healthcare systems a few years ago, and I found out actually that certain countries and certain geographies allow you to capitalize digital and data, particularly around data assets, interoperability, and so on, because they have return on investment over several years, and they deliver really the equivalent of hospital walls, new ways of delivering care in the home or near the home, right?
Yeah.
And so for the future, this is the hidden infrastructure. This will deliver care in the way that we've used buildings to deliver care in the past. We've used a building to, put somebody in a bed and do the ROBS or whatever. Well, the equivalent can be done in the home, but the most important piece about that is the data and the IT infrastructure around it. And so what we're doing is really building the infrastructure for the future. The issue is that if you go into any boardroom or policymaker, they can't necessarily picture that in their head. You can picture a nice shiny hospital, right? That's
Yeah.
capital infrastructure. That's worth making that investment on. Um, but when you talk about what we're doing, you have to paint those pictures in their heads. You have to make metaphors work, or whatever else. And so for me, this is the infrastructure. And coming back to those benefits I was talking about earlier, um, you know, this is going to be something that is worth the investment, because the return on investment will be huge if we can evolve our healthcare system into, developing new models of care that are more cost effective and safe.
Well, and if we have more information that we can leverage with technology, because my big thing with healthcare IT is what we're really supposed to be doing is helping, right?
Yes.
And with the reduction in the number of providers, with the aging population and with more comorbidities, if being able to rely on the healthcare systems we have could be tremendously powerful and reduce physician burden, improve outcomes, and in the states where you might get paid by your because based on your outcomes, that could be really
Yeah.
important.
And the ACOs as well, which are sort of,
Yeah.
an agenda in the US, you really need to know your populations deeply. We need that data.
So I don't know if you know, but clinical architecture has a small office in Exeter in the UK.
No, I
Yeah,
didn't. What a beautiful place. Yeah.
yeah, we've been working. I mean, back in my first data bank days, we had the office, the Multilex office in the UK, and actually our CTO lives in Oakhampton near Exeter.
Okay. Wow.
One of the things that I think might be interesting, if you're willing to talk about it with the listeners, is just some of the differences between how healthcare, you know, how healthcare infrastructure and technology works in the NHS versus the US. Like, for example, I hear people all the time that say, oh, well, healthcare must have, in the NHS, there must be total interoperability because the initiatives around SNOMED and DMD. But I'm curious your perspective on that.
Well, obviously, we're very different systems. So, the US is payer provider insurance based, and the UK is probably one of the most social healthcare systems in the UK in terms of the fact that, it's provided by the government. Um, yes, you would think that we are totally interoperable in the UK. We even had an NHS number and a single patient ID nearly 20 years ago, which was brilliant. But we have still not made that full interoperability leap. We still have data siloed within organizations or regions. Um, and that, I think, has been for a number of reasons, partly because of the way we've structured the system. Everyone thinks it's one NHS, but actually we've got around about 250 organizations, each with their own board and autonomy. Um, and so every system has its challenges, yeah? And every system has its opportunities. For me, so I came over and I was the first international CHCIO. So I came over and studied the US kind of curriculum because I really wanted to understand the US system going back about 8 years ago. And I can see the benefits of both types of system. I think I can also see the disbenefits of, both types of system as well. For me, though, the answer for the future is the same. We need this as infrastructure, whatever type of healthcare system we have in place. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think one of the things I tell people all the time, because it's kind of like the AI thing. I have people say, "Well, Charlie, if we just made everything SNOMED and we did this and we did this and we did this, we'd be sorted." What I kind of push back on with that is that in my experience, I've been doing this for like 37 years. Um, Healthcare is local.
Yeah.
No matter what we do, we cannot create a hard structured homogeneous approach to dealing with healthcare because the truth is each facility is dealing with things that they have to deal with. There's a sense of urgency, they need flexibility. And so the key isn't to try to force structure across the entire system. The key is to create a system that is resilient and interoperable.
Yeah. Absolutely. And there needs to be local buy-in. There needs to be local autonomy because populations are very different, geographies are very different, needs are very different. Yeah. And as a result of that, you have to tailor how you deliver healthcare in a different geography. And we need, also to be able to make sure that we've got all of the skills that we need within our healthcare workforces to actually do this. And one thing for me that I've seen, certainly across the UK, is that's not been evenly distributed. And I think for the future, we need to make sure that this is a profession that people know they can go into. Coming back to it's a job worth doing. We know about doctors. We tell our kids, hey, go be a doctor. But do we say work in terminology or work in interoperability? That for me is a really interesting one. because people that work locally have the skills and understand the populations will solve the problems in the right way using the standards.
Absolutely. And it's fascinating when you see people that, they started as developers, they started as clinicians, and they end up in health informatics, they end up in standards. And what's amazing about the HL7 community, because I've been kind of peripherally involved in HL7 over the years as a consumer, and I have friends like Carol McCumber
Yeah.
who are very involved in HL7, and I support her involvement in HL7 directly because I believe it's really important. The work that I've been doing lately with the Picky framework and the Picky Alliance has been my first real on the ground working experience with HL7, and I have to say, you know, working through consensus can be a little bit challenging at times, but at the same time, the willingness, the passion, the intelligence of the people involved, the whole community, it's just wonderful. The people, you could get in an argument with somebody over what word to use and what sentence and what you're doing, but at the end of the day, they're trying to help you. They're trying to take their experience and help make what you're doing better. And the net product of that is something better. And I just really appreciate, because also a lot of these people that are involved, they're not getting paid.
The volunteers, and they are our hidden heroes. And they get unseen quite often. You see a badge, but you don't see all of the hundreds or thousands of people behind that badge. And that's the incredible thing for me about HL7. It's 40 years next year that HL7 has been, in operation. And the sort of baton passing of generation to generation of developing these standards, the goodwill, the the sort of moral compass of these people to do the right thing for healthcare. It's just incredible. That's part of really the privilege of doing this job is to lead the organization, but to also acknowledge everything that has been done by thousands of people.
So when you think about the future with HL7, what gets you excited about where you're headed with HL7?
I think what gets me really excited about the future with HL7 is where we are. We're kind of, for me, especially with AI, at a point of almost an industrial revolution, yeah, where the game changes for all industries and especially for healthcare. And we have the ability to be that infrastructure, to be the fuel for AI that is safe, that has got the guardrails around it, that provides the assurance that people need to actually do this safely. And we also have the ability to be that infrastructure that powers the future healthcare system and how that's delivered. Um, and so for me, I think standards are really rising in their um, sort of importance and their relevance to the healthcare system. And I think they're really going to show their value. So for me, it's so exciting to work collaboratively to deliver that, both with HL7 and other standards bodies, around us, but also to bring on the next generation of people, as I said, who are going to do this work. It's going to be a growth profession, I think, and being able to provide education opportunities and an environment where people can thrive. I think it's solving healthcare's problems with modern infrastructure in a modern way.
Excellent. Is there anything else you'd like to share with the listeners?
No, not really. I think, if you want to get in touch, I'm absolutely happy. I'm on sort of LinkedIn. Give me a sort of wave or whatever else if you want to talk. But I just encourage everyone to get involved with HL7 and other standards, because for me, this is something that's really worth doing.
Will you be in Rotterdam?
I'll be in Rotterdam on the ship. Absolutely. Are you going to be with us as well?
I would love to be there. I just don't know if I can make it.
Oh, we'll
But
send you a postcard if you're
yes,
not. But
please do. I wanted to be in Madrid too, but
oh,
yeah, I was able to go to Pittsburgh, so
yeah, not too far for you. That's
not quite as fancy as Rotterdam, but Pittsburgh
yeah,
has its charm.
absolutely. Well, we look forward to seeing you at a future working group meeting, and we can meet in real life.
That would be delightful. Rachel, thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks, Charlie.
And I'm very excited to see where you take HL7 in the future.
Great. Thank you.
And for all of you out there, thank you very much. This is Charlie Harp, and this has been the Informonster Podcast. Thanks.